Chapter 1. The Eternal City Trembles. For centuries, Rome stood as the heart of a vast empire. People traveled from every corner of the known world to see its beauty. The marble streets shone under the sun. Statues of gods and heroes stood tall, watching over the busy marketplaces. The Colosseum, where gladiators once fought for glory, echoed with stories of triumph and tragedy. To its citizens, Rome was eternal. They believed it would never fall. But change was coming. Slowly, cracks began to appear, not in the marble streets, but in the empire itself. The signs were small at first. Farmers complained of heavy taxes. Soldiers grumbled about unpaid wages. Merchants worried about trade routes that were no longer safe. Still, most people carried on with their lives, trusting Rome's strength. After all, hadn't Rome survived countless wars? Hadn't it defeated its enemies time and time again? One warm evening, Julia, a young baker's daughter, sat with her family outside their small shop. The smell of fresh bread filled the air. She listened as her father spoke about the city. "Rome is like a great tree," he said, slicing a loaf. "Its roots are deep. Nothing can shake it." Julia nodded, but something about his words didn't feel right. Earlier that day, she had heard two men arguing near the market. "The barbarians are moving closer," one shouted. "The army can't stop them." The other man waved him off. "Nonsense," he said. "Rome has faced worse." That night, Julia couldn't sleep. The words stayed with her. The army can't stop them. She got up and looked out her window. The city was quiet, but in the distance she saw the flicker of torches near the walls. Were the soldiers ready? Did they know what was coming? In the emperor's palace, the mood was different. Servants rushed through the halls, carrying scrolls and messages. Emperor Honorius sat in a grand chamber, surrounded by advisors. His face was pale. News had arrived that Alaric, the leader of the Visigoths, was gathering his forces. They were heading straight for Rome. "What do we do?" an advisor asked. "The people expect us to act." Honorius stared at the floor. He was not a strong leader. Many said he cared more about his chickens than his empire. He sighed deeply. "Send a message," he said at last. "Offer them gold. Maybe that will make them leave." Back in the city, the whispers grew louder. At the baths, in the temples, and on the streets, people asked the same questions. Are we safe? Will the army protect us? Rumors spread like wildfire. Some said the emperor had fled. Others claimed the gates had been opened to the enemy. Fear hung in the air. One morning, Julia's neighbor, an old soldier named Marcus, stopped by the shop. He had fought in many battles for Rome and wore a scar across his cheek like a badge of honor. "Marcus," Julia's father said, "tell us the truth. Is Rome in danger?" Marcus hesitated. He looked at Julia, then her father. "The truth?" he said, lowering his voice. "Rome is weaker than it used to be. The army is stretched thin. Our enemies know this." Julia's heart sank. She had always seen Marcus as a symbol of Rome's strength. If he was worried, how could the rest of them feel safe? Days turned into weeks. The tension in the city grew unbearable. Soldiers patrolled the streets, their faces hard and serious. Families began storing food, unsure of what was coming. At night, the sound of hammers echoed through the streets as people reinforced their doors and windows. Then, one day, a distant sound reached the city. It was faint at first, like the murmur of a storm far away. But it grew louder. Drums, marching feet. The Visigoths were near. From the walls, the guards could see the enemy's campfires dotting the horizon. There were so many. One soldier whispered, "It's like the stars have fallen to the earth." Inside the city, panic erupted. Crowds filled the streets, shouting and crying. Julia clung to her mother as her father tried to calm a frightened customer. "Stay inside," he warned. "Keep your family safe." That night, the city held its breath. Would the walls hold? Would the enemy attack? Julia lay awake, listening to every sound. The distant drums, the cries of owls, the wind rustling the leaves. Each noise felt like a warning. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the streets. Julia jumped up and ran to the window. Smoke rose in the distance. The Visigoths had broken through one of the gates. Fires spread quickly as the enemy poured into the city. Shouts and screams filled the air. Julia's father grabbed her hand. "We have to go," he said. They ran through the streets, dodging panicked crowds. Marcus, the old soldier, appeared out of the smoke. "This way," he shouted, leading them to a hidden alley. From there, Julia watched as the city burned. The proud marble streets were blackened with ash. Statues crumbled under the weight of the flames. The Colosseum stood silent, a ghost of its former glory. For hours they hid in the shadows, hoping the chaos would pass. Julia clung to her father, her heart pounding. She thought about all the stories she had heard about Rome's greatness. Was this really the end? When morning came, the fires had died down. The Visigoths were gone, but the city was in ruins. Smoke hung heavy in the air. People wandered the streets, searching for loved ones. Julia saw a woman kneeling by the remains of her home, clutching a broken statue of a god. Tears streamed down her face. Marcus stood beside Julia and her family. He looked at the destruction and shook his head. "Rome has fallen before," he said softly. "But this is different." Julia looked at him, her eyes wide. "Can we rebuild?" she asked. Marcus didn't answer right away. He stared at the distant hills where the Visigoths had disappeared. "We must," he said finally, "but it won't be easy. The cracks are too deep now." Julia took her father's hand and held it tightly. She didn't know what the future held, but one thing was clear. The Eternal City was no longer unshakable. For the first time in centuries, Rome trembled. Chapter 2. A World Divided. Rome was a giant. Its lands stretched from the cold forests of Britain to the hot sands of Egypt. The empire was powerful, but difficult to control. Roads connected distant cities, and messengers carried news. But it took weeks, sometimes months, for orders to reach the farthest provinces. Rebellion and unrest grew in the shadows. By the time Emperor Diocletian came to power in 284 AD, the problems were impossible to ignore. Diocletian was a clever man. He saw that ruling such a vast empire alone was dangerous. Rome must be divided, he declared one morning to his advisors. It is the only way to save it. The room fell silent. Divide Rome? The empire that had ruled the world for centuries? The advisors exchanged uneasy looks. Will the people accept this? One finally asked. They must, Diocletian said firmly. One ruler cannot be everywhere. We need 2 leaders, 2 capitals. This will make us stronger. In 285 AD, Diocletian split the empire into 2 parts. The Eastern Roman Empire, with its capital in the grand city of Byzantium, later called Constantinople, and the Western Roman Empire, with its capital in Rome itself. Diocletian ruled the East, leaving the West to another emperor. For the Eastern Empire, the change brought stability. Its cities were wealthy, its trade routes secure. But in the West, the story was different. In a small town near the western border, a young soldier named Lucius trained with his legion. He was loyal to Rome and proud to serve. But the news of the split confused him. 2 empires? He muttered, sharpening his sword one evening. How can we fight for one Rome if it's now 2? His friend Marcus, an older soldier with graying hair, sat beside him. It's complicated, Marcus admitted. Diocletian thinks this will protect us, but I worry. Lucius frowned. Why? Marcus leaned closer, lowering his voice. Because the West is weaker. The Eastern Empire has the riches. They have strong cities, good defenses. But here? Look around. Our roads are crumbling. Our forts are old. The soldiers don't trust the leaders anymore. Lucius didn't reply. He looked out at the horizon. The sun was setting, casting a red glow over the distant hills. For the first time, he felt a shadow of doubt. Life in the Western Empire grew harder. Farmers struggled to produce enough food. Merchants avoided dangerous roads, fearing bandits. Taxes rose, and many citizens could not pay. People whispered that the emperors cared more about their own power than the welfare of the empire. Lucius saw it firsthand. One day, his legion was ordered to defend a nearby town from a barbarian raid. They marched for 3 days, tired and hungry. When they arrived, they found the town in ruins. Smoke rose from burned homes. People wandered the streets, their faces blank with shock. A woman clutched a child to her chest, her voice shaking. "Where were you?" she cried. "We begged for help. Why didn't you come sooner?" Lucius felt a wave of guilt. "We came as fast as we could," he said softly. Marcus put a hand on his shoulder. "It's not your fault, boy," he said. "But it's true. Our leaders are failing us." In Constantinople, the Eastern Empire thrived. The city sparkled with wealth. Merchants traded silk, spices, and jewels in its bustling markets. The emperor there was strong and decisive. Walls protected the city, and its armies were well equipped. But the Western Empire was left to fend for itself. The two halves of Rome no longer worked as one. Lucius and his comrades felt the divide keenly. Supplies that once flowed freely from the east now arrived late, if at all. Letters from Eastern officials offered advice, but no real help. One night, as the soldiers sat around their campfire, Lucius voiced his frustration. "Do they even care about us anymore?" he asked. "Do they know how much we're struggling?" Marcus looked into the fire, his face grim. "The East has its own problems," he said. "They'll save themselves first." Lucius clenched his fists. "But we're all Romans, aren't we?" Marcus sighed. "Rome isn't what it used to be, Lucius. It's no longer one great empire. It's two worlds now. And the West? We're on our own." The cracks in the empire grew wider. In the West, local leaders took more power for themselves, ignoring the orders of distant emperors. Some towns built their own defenses, refusing to rely on Rome's failing armies. Lucius saw the spirit of Rome fading. Once, soldiers like him had fought with pride. Now, many deserted. Why fight for an empire that seemed to be falling apart? Why risk their lives for leaders who gave them nothing in return? One cold winter, Lucius and Marcus were stationed at a border fort. The wind howled through the cracks in the walls, and the soldiers huddled together for warmth. Supplies were late again, and food was running out. "I can't do this anymore," one soldier said, throwing down his spear. "I'm going home. Let the barbarians come. What does it matter?" "It matters!" Lucius shouted, standing up. "Rome is worth fighting for." But as he looked around, he saw the doubt in his comrades' eyes. Even Marcus said nothing. The split of the empire had been meant to save it, but instead, it weakened the West. The Eastern Empire thrived, its wealth and power growing. The Western Empire sank deeper into chaos. For Lucius, it was a painful realization. He had grown up hearing stories of Rome's glory. He had dreamed of serving an empire that ruled the world, but now he saw the truth. Rome was no longer the unshakable force it once was. It was a world divided. As the years passed, Lucius stayed with the army. He fought to defend the Western Empire as best he could, but in his heart he knew that without unity, Rome could not survive. One evening, as he watched the sun set over the hills, he thought of Marcus's words, "Rome isn't what it used to be." Lucius gripped his sword tightly. "Then we'll make it strong again," he whispered to himself. But even as he spoke, he wondered if it was already too late. Chapter 3. Gold turns to dust. Rome had once been the wealthiest empire in the world. Gold and silver flowed into its coffers from every corner of its vast lands. The markets were filled with treasures, silks from the East, spices from Africa, and fine pottery from Gaul. But as the centuries passed, Rome's riches began to fade. In a small Roman town near the Tiber River, a merchant named Decimus stood outside his shop. The shelves inside were almost empty. The once bustling marketplace was quiet. A few farmers shuffled by, their faces worn and tired. Decimus sighed deeply. His family had been merchants for generations, trading goods across the empire. But now, trade was slowing, and taxes were rising. "How will we survive, Father?" asked his daughter Livia, standing beside him. She was 12 years old, with bright eyes that once sparkled with hope. But even she could see that times were changing. Decimus looked at her and forced a smile. "We always find a way," he said. But in his heart, he wasn't so sure. The trouble had started years ago. Rome's wars had become endless, draining its treasury. Soldiers needed to be paid, weapons needed to be forged, and fortifications needed to be built. The empire's leaders demanded more and more taxes from its people. Farmers, merchants, and craftsmen were forced to give up their earnings or face punishment. Decimus remembered the first time the tax collectors came to his shop. They had taken coins from his strongbox without even looking at him. "This is for Rome," they had said, "for your protection." Protection, Decimus thought bitterly. But who is protecting us now? As the wars continued, trade routes became dangerous. Bandits and raiders roamed the roads, attacking caravans. Merchant ships were seized by pirates. Goods that once arrived on time were delayed or lost forever. One morning, Decimus received a letter from his brother, who lived in the port city of Ostia. The letter was short and grim. "The shipment will not arrive. Pirates attacked the ship. There is nothing left." Decimus read the letter aloud to his wife, Aurelia. She covered her mouth with her hand, her face pale. "What will we sell?" she whispered. "We have no goods, no coins." "I don't know," Decimus admitted. He looked at the shelves in the shop. They were nearly bare, save for a few clay jars and a basket of old fabrics. He thought of the market square, where other merchants were struggling too. The once lively town was now quiet, almost lifeless. The struggles of merchants like Decimus were only part of the story. In the countryside, farmers were suffering even more. Heavy taxes left them with little to eat. Many abandoned their lands, leaving fields to wither. One evening, as Decimus closed his shop, he saw a farmer sitting by the road. The man looked thin and exhausted. A small cart beside him held a few wilted vegetables. "Are you all right?" Decimus asked, walking over. The farmer shook his head. "No one buys anymore," he said. "Everyone is too poor. And the taxes—" His voice broke. "They took everything. How can I feed my children?" Decimus felt a pang of guilt. He wanted to help, but he had nothing to give. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. The farmer nodded and looked away. "We're all sorry," he muttered. At home that night, Livia sat by the fire, watching her parents talk. Decimus paced back and forth, his hands clenched into fists. "It's not fair," he said. "We've worked so hard, and now it's all slipping away." Aurelia tried to comfort him. "Maybe things will get better," she said softly. "The Emperor will fix this." Decimus shook his head. "The Emperor?" he said bitterly. He only cares about his palace and his games. Does he even know what's happening to his people? Livia listened silently. She had always believed her father was strong, that he could solve any problem. But now, even he seemed lost. As the months passed, the situation grew worse. Decimus sold the last of his goods. The shop became an empty shell. Aurelia started weaving cloth to trade for food, but even that was not enough. One day, Livia asked, "What happened to all of Rome's gold? Where did it go?" Decimus looked at her sadly. "Wars," he said. "Corruption, greed. The empire is bleeding, Livia, and we're paying the price." "But Rome is so big," she said. "How can it run out of money?" Decimus sighed. "Because no empire lasts forever," he said. "Even the strongest can fall." One evening, as the family shared a small meal of bread and cheese, there was a knock at the door. Decimus opened it to find a young man dressed in rags. His face was dirty, and his eyes were desperate. "Please," the man said. "I was a soldier. I fought for Rome. But now I have nothing. I need food." Decimus hesitated. He had so little to give. But he remembered the farmer by the road, the countless faces of those who had come to him for help. He went to the table, broke off a piece of bread, and handed it to the man. "Thank you," the man said, his voice shaking. "You're a good man." As the man walked away, Livia looked at her father. "Why did you do that?" she asked. "We don't have enough for ourselves." "Because we're Romans," Decimus said firmly. "And Romans help each other, no matter what." The days turned into weeks, and the struggles continued. But despite everything, Decimus refused to give up. He started repairing old goods and selling them at the market. Aurelia wove more cloth, and Livia helped where she could. They worked harder than ever, clinging to the hope that better days would come. One morning, as they opened the shop, Livia saw a small coin glinting in the sunlight. Someone had left it on the doorstep. "Look," she cried, picking it up. Decimus smiled faintly. "It's not much," he said, "but it's a start." The family held onto that coin as a symbol of hope. Even as the empire around them crumbled, they believed they could endure. They were just one family in a vast, struggling empire. But their resilience, like so many others, was what kept the spirit of Rome alive, even as its gold turned to dust. Chapter 4. Enemies at the Gates. The year was 410 AD. Rome, the eternal city, faced its darkest hour. News spread quickly. Alaric and his Visigoths were coming. The people of Rome had heard of Alaric before. He was fierce and determined, a barbarian king who had defeated Roman armies many times. Now, he marched toward the great city itself. Tiberius, a boy of 12, stood with his family in their small home near the edge of Rome. His father paced the room, his face pale. His mother whispered prayers at the small altar by the wall. Tiberius didn't understand everything, but he could feel their fear. "Will they break through the walls, Father?" he asked quietly. His father stopped pacing and looked at him. "The walls are strong," he said, trying to sound confident. "They have stood for hundreds of years." Tiberius nodded, but his stomach twisted with worry. He had overheard men in the market whispering that the city was unprepared. The soldiers were tired, supplies were low, and Alaric's army was huge. Days passed, and the tension in the city grew. The gates were closed. Guards stood at every entrance, their faces grim. Merchants packed up their stalls and locked their doors. The streets, once lively and loud, were now eerily quiet. Tiberius and his little sister Julia stayed close to home. Their mother made them help gather food and water. "We don't know how long this will last," she said. At night, Tiberius couldn't sleep. He climbed onto the roof and looked toward the horizon. Fires burned in the distance where Alaric's army camped. He imagined the Visigoths, strong, wild warriors with swords and shields, ready to attack. "What will they do to us?" he whispered to himself. One morning, the sound of horns shattered the silence. Tiberius ran to the window. People were rushing through the streets, shouting and crying. "What's happening?" Julia asked, clinging to their mother. "The gates!" someone yelled. "They've opened the gates!" Tiberius's father grabbed a small sack of food and pulled them toward the door. "We must go," he said. "We can't stay here." "Where will we hide?" Tiberius asked. His father didn't answer. He pushed them into the crowded streets. People ran in every direction. Some carried children. Others dragged carts of belongings. The sound of screams and crashing wood filled the air as the Visigoths poured into the city. Tiberius looked back and saw them, men with wild hair and fierce eyes, swinging swords and axes. They shouted in a language he didn't understand. Behind them, flames rose as houses burned. The family ran through the narrow alleys, avoiding the main roads. "This way," his father said, leading them toward an old temple. Inside, dozens of people huddled together, their faces pale with fear. "Stay here," his father said. "I'll try to find help." "No!" his mother cried, grabbing his arm. "You can't leave us." "I'll be careful," he promised. "Stay hidden." Tiberius watched his father slip out the door. He wanted to go with him, to be brave like him, but his legs trembled. He sat down next to Julia, who was crying softly. "It's okay," he whispered, even though he wasn't sure if it was true. Hours passed, though it felt like days. The sounds of chaos outside grew louder, shouts, screams, and the crash of falling buildings. Smoke seeped into the temple, making everyone cough. An old man near the door began to speak. "I remember when Rome was strong," he said, his voice shaking. "No enemy would dare attack us. But now we are weak." "Be quiet," someone hissed. "You'll frighten the children." But Tiberius was already frightened. He thought of the stories his father had told him. Stories of Rome's greatness. The mighty legions, the grand parades, the golden days of the empire. How had it all come to this? As night fell, the city burned. From the temple doorway, Tiberius could see the orange glow of flames lighting up the sky. He held Julia close, trying to block out the sounds of crying and shouting around him. Finally, his father returned. His clothes were torn, and his face was streaked with ash. "We can't stay here," he said, his voice hoarse. "The Visigoths are everywhere. We must leave the city." "But where will we go?" his mother asked. "South," he said. "We'll find safety in the countryside." The family slipped out of the temple under cover of darkness. They stayed close to the shadows, avoiding the Visigoths who roamed the streets. Tiberius's heart pounded with every step. Once, they passed a burning house. A woman stood outside, wailing as the flames consumed everything she owned. "Don't look," his father said, pulling him away. But Tiberius couldn't help it. He wondered if their own house was burning too. Was there anything left of the life they had known? By dawn, they reached the city gates. The guards were gone. The gates, once so strong and proud, hung open like broken wings. Beyond them, the road stretched into the countryside, empty and silent. Tiberius turned back and looked at the city. Smoke rose from every corner. The grand buildings he had loved, the Colosseum, the temples, the markets, were in ruins. His chest tightened. "Will we ever come back?" he asked. His father didn't answer. He placed a hand on Tiberius's shoulder and led him forward. For days they traveled through the countryside, avoiding towns and villages. The roads were filled with other refugees, families carrying what little they could. Tiberius saw the same fear in their eyes that he felt in his own heart. Finally, they found a small farm owned by a kind old woman. She gave them bread and let them rest in her barn. That night, as they lay on the straw, Julia whispered, "Are we safe now?" "For now," their father said. "But Rome is not the same. It will never be the same." Years later, Tiberius would tell his children about that terrible night. He would describe the flames, the fear, and the loss. He would tell them how Rome, the eternal city, had fallen. But he would also tell them about the strength of his family, about how they had survived together, and about how, even in the darkest times, hope could still shine. Chapter 5. A weak chain of leaders. The fall of Rome was not caused by one event. It was not just the wars, the invasions, or the economy. Another reason was the emperors. Many of them were weak, some were selfish. Others were young and inexperienced. The empire needed strong leaders to survive. But instead, it had men like Emperor Honorius. Honorius became emperor when he was only 10 years old. A boy sitting on the throne of a crumbling empire. At first, he relied on older men to make decisions. But as he grew older, it became clear. Honorius was not a great leader. In the grand halls of the palace, Honorius spent his time doing anything but ruling. He loved games. He loved food. But most of all, he loved his chickens. Yes, chickens. The emperor had dozens of them. He even gave them names, treating them like friends. "Your Majesty," one advisor said during a meeting, "we must strengthen the borders. The barbarians are coming closer." Honorius waved him off. "I'll think about it later," he said, tossing grain to his favorite chicken, who he called Rome. The advisors exchanged worried looks. They knew the empire was in trouble. But how could they save it, with an emperor who cared more about birds than his people? In the Senate, the frustration was growing. Senators, once powerful voices in Roman politics, now felt helpless. One of them, Senator Cassius, often spoke against the emperor. "How can we trust him?" Cassius demanded during a heated debate. "While Rome burns, he plays with chickens. Who will lead us now?" Another senator raised his hands. "Careful, Cassius. The emperor may not listen to us, but his guards do." "I don't care," Cassius said, slamming his hand on the table. "Rome needs a leader, not a child who hides from his duties." The room fell silent. Everyone knew he was right, but no one dared to challenge Honorius openly. One day, Cassius walked through the streets of Rome. He saw the problems everywhere. The roads were full of potholes. Markets were empty because traders were afraid to travel. Soldiers begged for food because they hadn't been paid. Cassius stopped by a fountain where a group of men sat, their faces tired and thin. "What happened to you?" he asked one of them. "We are farmers," the man said. "The taxes were too high. We couldn't pay, so they took our land. Now we have nothing." Cassius clenched his fists. He thought of all the gold wasted on palace feasts and games. How could the emperor let his people suffer like this? Meanwhile, Honorius remained in his palace, ignoring the troubles outside. His general, Stilicho, tried to hold the empire together. Stilicho was a strong leader. He fought battles to keep the barbarians away and managed the empire's defenses. But even Stilicho couldn't do it all alone. He needed the emperor's support. And Honorius? He refused to listen. Some even said he was jealous of Stilicho's popularity. One night, Stilicho met with Cassius in secret. The two men shared their fears. "Honorius won't act," Stilicho said, his voice low. "He doesn't see the danger." Cassius nodded. "If the emperor doesn't change, Rome will fall." Stilicho sighed. "I'll do what I can, but I don't know if it will be enough." The empire's problems continued to grow. Alaric, the leader of the Visigoths, was watching. He saw Rome's weakness and planned his next move. He had already defeated Roman armies. Now, he set his sights on the city itself. News of Alaric's approach reached the palace. Honorius panicked. "Send gold," he ordered. "Pay him to leave." "But your Majesty," one advisor said, "we cannot buy peace forever." Honorius ignored him. He sent messengers with bags of gold to Alaric, hoping it would keep the Visigoths away. For a while, it worked, but not for long. In the streets, the people began to lose hope. They heard rumors about the emperor's actions, or lack of them. "He cares more about his chickens than us," one man said bitterly. Even the soldiers started to grumble. "Why should we fight?" a young legionnaire asked. "The emperor doesn't care about us." Cassius tried to rally the Senate. "We cannot wait for Honorius to act," he said. "We must lead the people." "But how?" another senator asked. "The emperor still holds power." "For now," Cassius said. "But power means nothing without the respect of the people." One evening, Honorius sat in his garden, surrounded by his chickens. He laughed as Rome flapped her wings and pecked at the ground. Suddenly, a messenger burst through the gate, out of breath. "Your Majesty," he cried, "Alaric is marching on Rome." Honorius dropped his handful of grain. "Again?" he said, his voice trembling. "Send more gold." "There is no more gold," the messenger said. "The treasury is empty." For the first time, Honorius looked truly afraid. He stood up and paced the garden. "What do we do? What do we do?" The truth was, it was already too late. Rome had no leader strong enough to face its enemies. The chain of emperors before Honorius had been weak, each one adding to the empire's troubles. Corruption, greed, and poor decisions had brought Rome to the brink. Cassius stood in the Senate chamber the next day, addressing the few senators who remained. "The emperor has failed us," he said, "but we must not fail Rome." The senators murmured in agreement, but their faces were grim. They knew the challenges were too great. Without a strong emperor, how could they save the empire? In the end, Honorius stayed in his palace, far from the danger. He didn't even try to defend the city when the Visigoths came. He watched as others tried and failed to stop the inevitable. As the flames of Rome lit up the night sky, Honorius sat alone in his chambers. His chickens clucked softly around him. He stared out the window, his face blank. "Rome," he whispered, looking at his favorite chicken. "What have I done?" Chapter 6. The Desertion of the Légions. Lucius was an old man now. His hands were rough, his back bent, but his memories were sharp. Every night, as the fire crackled in his small home, he thought about his years as a legionnaire. He had fought for Rome. He had defended its borders. But he had also seen the legions fall apart. He shook his head as he stared into the flames. "We were strong once," he muttered. But then, everything changed. Lucius had joined the army as a young man. Like many others, he had dreamed of glory. He remembered the feeling of pride when he first put on his armor. The eagle crest of Rome shone brightly on his shield. "We protect the empire," his commander had said. "We are the heart of Rome." At first, it was true. The legions were powerful. They marched in perfect lines, their discipline unmatched. Enemies feared them. Borders were secure. Cities were safe. But over time, cracks began to appear. Lucius's first taste of trouble came during a cold winter on the northern frontier. His legion was stationed near the Rhine River, watching for barbarian raiders. Supplies were late. The soldiers' boots were worn out. They had little food, and the harsh wind bit through their thin cloaks. "We're forgotten out here," one soldier grumbled as they huddled around a small fire. "The senators in Rome sit in warm villas while we freeze." "Quiet," Lucius said, though he felt the same frustration. He looked toward the horizon. Somewhere out there, the enemy was waiting. The battle came suddenly. One morning, the barbarian tribes attacked. Their war cries filled the air as they charged through the snow. Lucius and his comrades formed a line, shields raised, spears ready. "Hold!" the commander shouted. "Hold the line!" The clash was brutal. The barbarians fought fiercely, swinging axes and swords. Lucius's shield splintered under a heavy blow. He fell, but another soldier pulled him up. They fought side by side, pushing back the enemy. By nightfall, the battle was over. The Romans had won, but barely. Many soldiers lay dead in the snow. Lucius looked around at his weary comrades. "We survived," he said, trying to sound hopeful. But inside, he wondered how much longer they could keep fighting like this. When the soldiers returned to their camp, they expected a reward. They had risked their lives for Rome. They had done their duty. But instead of gold or new supplies, they were given nothing. "The treasury is empty," the commander told them. "You'll have to wait." "Wait!" one soldier shouted. "We can't eat promises." The camp grew restless. Soldiers whispered in the shadows, their voices bitter. Lucius tried to calm them. "Rome has always taken care of us," he said. "We must trust our leaders." But his words rang hollow. Even he was beginning to doubt. Months passed, and the situation worsened. Supplies became even scarcer. Some soldiers deserted, slipping away in the night. Others stayed, but refused to fight. One day, Lucius overheard a group of men plotting. "Why should we stay?" one said. "Rome has abandoned us. We should take what we need." "You mean rebel?" another asked, his voice trembling. "Why not?" the first man replied. "The senators don't care about us. The emperor doesn't care. We have to survive." Lucius stepped forward. "Don't do this," he said firmly. "We are soldiers of Rome. If we turn against her, we lose everything." The men looked at him but said nothing. Lucius saw the desperation in their eyes. He knew they were right about one thing. Rome had abandoned them. The final blow came during a campaign in the east. Lucius's legion was ordered to march to defend a distant province. They were tired, hungry, and unpaid. Many soldiers refused to go. "We'll die out there," one man said. "Why should we follow orders?" The commander tried to restore order. "You swore an oath," he shouted. "You are legionnaires." But the men were no longer listening. They threw down their weapons and walked away. Lucius stood frozen, watching them go. He felt a deep ache in his chest. The legion was falling apart. Years later, Lucius retired. He returned to a small farm near Rome, hoping to find peace. But the memories haunted him. He thought of his comrades, the battles they had fought, the loyalty they had once shared. All of it seemed so far away. One day, a young boy from the village came to visit him. "Is it true you were a soldier?" the boy asked, his eyes wide with curiosity. Lucius nodded. "I was." "Were you brave?" the boy asked. Lucius hesitated. "We were brave," he said finally. But bravery wasn't enough. Rome needed more than soldiers. It needed leaders who cared. As he spoke, Lucius thought about the empire. He thought about the emperors who had let the legions wither, the senators who had hoarded wealth while soldiers starved. The glory of Rome had faded because those in power had forgotten the people who had built it. The boy looked confused. "What happened to Rome?" he asked. Lucius sighed deeply. "Rome grew weak," he said, "and when Rome grew weak, so did we." That night, Lucius sat by the fire, staring into the flames. He thought of his comrades, the men who had fought beside him, the men who had deserted, the men who had died. He missed them. He missed the pride they had once felt as legionnaires. "Rome was strong," he whispered, "but even the strongest can fall." As the fire crackled, Lucius closed his eyes. The memories of the legions stayed with him, a reminder of what Rome had lost. Chapter 7. Barbarians at the Crossroads. My name is Wulfric. I am a warrior of the Visigoths, but I was not always a warrior. I was just a boy when my people began their journey, a journey to find a home. We were hungry. We were tired. We were looking for safety. Instead, we found war. I remember the cold morning when we crossed the great river. The elders called it the Danube. On the other side was Roman land. We had heard stories about Rome. They said it was rich. They said it was powerful. But they also said it was weak now, not like before. Our leader, Alaric, promised us we would be safe in Roman lands. He had spoken to Roman leaders. They had agreed to let us settle. But things did not go as planned. The Romans gave us little food. They treated us like slaves. My father, a proud hunter, grew angry. "This is not what they promised us," he said one night by the fire. "They will not help us. We must help ourselves." Years passed. The Visigoths grew stronger. We fought back against the Romans who had mistreated us. Alaric became our king. He led us in raids across the empire. We took what we needed: food, gold, supplies. We no longer trusted the Romans. Then one day, Alaric called the warriors together. "The time has come," he said. We will march to the heart of their empire. We will march to Rome. The men cheered, but I felt a knot in my stomach. I had never faced the Roman army. I had only heard stories of their mighty legions, their unbreakable discipline. Could we really defeat them? As we marched, I tried to hide my fear. I was young, barely old enough to hold a sword, but I wanted to prove myself. I wanted to make my father proud. "Keep your head high," he told me. "We fight for our people. We fight for our future." I nodded, though my hands trembled. The weight of my shield felt heavy. The blade at my side felt unfamiliar. I had trained with it, yes, but this was different. This was real. The day of the battle arrived. The Roman army stood in a long line, their shields gleaming in the sun. They looked strong. They looked ready. Our warriors stood across from them, shouting war cries. Some banged their swords against their shields. The sound was loud, fierce, and frightening. But I couldn't join in. My throat was dry. My heart raced. I looked at my father. He was calm. "Stay close to me," he said. "Watch my movements, and remember, you are a Visigoth. Fight with honor." I nodded again, gripping my shield tightly. The Roman commander raised his arm. A signal. The battle began. The first wave of Romans charged forward. They moved as one like a wall of iron. Our warriors rushed to meet them. I followed my father, trying to stay close. The clash was deafening, metal against metal, shouts and screams. A Roman soldier came at me. His sword slashed toward my head. I raised my shield just in time, the impact shaking my arm. I stumbled back, but managed to swing my blade. It missed. The soldier advanced again. I thought I was going to die. Then my father appeared. His spear struck the soldier, who fell to the ground. "Focus, Wulfric!" he shouted. "Do not freeze!" I nodded, breathing hard. The battle raged on around me. For hours, the fighting continued. The Romans were strong, but so were we. Our warriors fought with everything they had. I saw my uncle fall, a Roman spear piercing his side. I wanted to cry out, but I couldn't. I had to keep fighting. I remembered my father's words. We fight for our people. We fight for our future. By nightfall, the Romans began to retreat. Their lines broke, their soldiers fled. We had won. But it didn't feel like a victory to me. The field was covered in bodies, Roman and Visigoth alike. The air smelled of blood and smoke. I sat down, my legs trembling. My shield was cracked. My sword was dull. My father sat beside me, his face grim. "You fought well," he said. "You are no longer a boy, Wulfric. Today, you became a warrior." I didn't feel like a warrior. I felt tired. I felt sad. I thought of the Roman soldier who had tried to kill me. He was just a man, like me. Did he have a family waiting for him? Did he fight because he believed in something, just as I did? The days after the battle were quiet. We marched toward Rome, taking what we needed along the way. Villages emptied as we approached. The people feared us. I understood why. We had brought destruction, but we had no choice. We needed food. We needed land. When we reached the gates of Rome, my breath caught in my chest. The city was massive, larger than anything I had ever seen. Its walls were tall and strong. Its towers rose high into the sky. I couldn't believe we were here. Rome, my father said softly. The heart of the empire. But Rome's heart was weak. Its leaders were divided. Its people were starving. Alaric sent a message to the emperor, demanding food and gold. If they do not give it, he told us, we will take it. I looked at the city walls, wondering about the people inside. Were they like us? Were they afraid, hungry, and desperate? I thought of the battle we had fought, the lives lost on both sides. Was there no other way? The gates of Rome eventually opened, not because of strength, but because of fear. We entered the city as conquerors, yet as I walked through its streets, I felt no pride. The people looked at us with hatred and sorrow. Children cried. Women hid their faces. That night, as the fires burned, I sat with my father. Did we do the right thing? I asked him. He looked at me, his eyes heavy with years of struggle. We do what we must to survive, he said. This is our time now, Wulfric. But remember, it will not last forever. Chapter 8. The Day the Vandals Came. My name is Claudia, and I was born in Rome. It was the greatest city in the world, or so we believed. Its streets were wide and filled with people. Markets sold goods from faraway lands. Temples stood tall, and fountains flowed with fresh water. But everything changed the day the Vandals came. I remember that day clearly. It was summer, hot and dry. My husband, Marcus, was working in his shop. He made pottery, beautiful bowls and vases that people from all over the city came to buy. I was at home feeding my baby daughter when I heard the bells. The bells were always a warning. They meant danger was coming. But this time, the bells kept ringing, louder and longer than I had ever heard before. My heart raced. Marcus burst through the door, his face pale. "The Vandals are here," he said. "They've come by sea." I froze, clutching my daughter close. I had heard stories of the Vandals, fierce warriors from across the sea. They were known for destroying everything in their path. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice shaking. "We must leave," Marcus said. "We can't stay here." We grabbed what little we could carry, some bread, a blanket, and a few coins. The streets were already crowded with people running in all directions. Some carried children. Others pulled carts filled with their belongings. The sound of shouting and crying filled the air. I held my daughter tightly as Marcus led us toward the gates of the city. "We'll be safe outside the walls," he said. But deep down, I wasn't sure if anywhere was safe. As we ran, I saw soldiers rushing toward the harbor. Their faces were grim. The Vandals had arrived in ships, hundreds of them. They poured onto the shores like a wave, their swords glinting in the sunlight. A man beside us stumbled and fell. He cried out for help, but no one stopped. Marcus pulled me forward. "We can't stop," he said. "We have to keep moving." My legs felt heavy, but I didn't argue. I knew he was right. We reached the gates, only to find them blocked. The crowd was too large, and the guards wouldn't let anyone out. "Turn back," one of them shouted. "Go back to your homes." "Back to our homes?" Marcus said angrily. "Our homes won't protect us." But there was no choice. The gates remained shut. We turned and began walking back, our hearts sinking. Around us, people cried and shouted, begging the guards to let them pass. By the time we returned to our street, the Vandals had entered the city. Smoke rose in the distance, and the air smelled of fire. I could hear the clash of swords, the screams of people fighting for their lives. Marcus grabbed my hand. "We'll hide," he said. "They won't find us." We ran into his pottery shop and closed the door. He pushed a heavy table against it and motioned for me to follow him to the back room. "Stay quiet," he whispered. The next hours were the longest of my life. I sat on the floor, holding my daughter as she cried softly. Marcus paced the room, his eyes darting toward the door every time we heard a noise. At one point, we heard footsteps outside. A group of Vandals shouted in their language, laughing as they kicked down doors and smashed windows. I held my breath, praying they wouldn't come inside. The sound of breaking pottery made my heart sink. Marcus closed his eyes, his face filled with pain. His shop, his life's work, was being destroyed. When the noises faded, we stayed where we were, too afraid to move. It wasn't until night fell that we dared to step outside. The street was unrecognizable. Fires burned everywhere, lighting up the dark sky. Houses were broken into, their contents scattered on the ground. I saw a neighbor sitting in front of her home, crying over a smashed statue. "What do we do now?" I whispered. "We survive," Marcus said firmly. "We'll rebuild. We have to." The days that followed were filled with sorrow. The Vandals stayed in the city for 2 weeks, taking everything they could. Gold, food, and treasures were loaded onto their ships. But they didn't stop there. They destroyed what they couldn't take. They smashed statues, burned buildings, and tore down walls. I saw people fighting over scraps of food in the streets. Children cried for parents they couldn't find. Everywhere I looked, I saw loss. One day, as I searched for water, I met an old woman sitting by a ruined fountain. She looked at me with tired eyes. "Rome is dying," she said. "The city will never recover from this." Her words stayed with me. Was she right? Could Rome ever return to what it had been? When the Vandals finally left, the city was silent. The once bustling streets were empty. Smoke still rose from the ruins. Marcus and I stood outside our shop, looking at what remained. The door was broken. The shelves were bare. Every piece of pottery was gone or smashed to bits. "It's all gone," Marcus said, his voice hollow. I put a hand on his shoulder. "We still have each other," I said, "and we have her." I looked at our daughter, who was asleep in my arms. "We'll start again." Rebuilding wasn't easy. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Marcus worked tirelessly, gathering clay from the river to make new pots. I traded bread and water with neighbors, helping each other survive. The city began to heal, but it was never the same. The grandeur of Rome was gone. Its spirit, however, remained. Years later, I told my daughter about the Vandals. She was old enough to understand then. "Why did they do it?" she asked. "Why did they destroy everything?" "They were hungry, like us," I said. "They wanted what Rome had." "But was it worth it?" she asked. I didn't have an answer. Instead, I took her to the shop, where Marcus was working on a new vase. "This is what matters," I said. "Not the gold or the statues. What matters is that we keep going." Even now, as I sit in our little shop, I think of that day. The day the Vandals came. It was the day we lost everything. But it was also the day we learned how strong we could be. Rome had fallen, but its people, the ones who stayed, found a way to survive. And so did we. Chapter 9. Rome's Final Emperor. My name is Julia. I worked in the palace of the Roman emperor. I was just a servant, sweeping floors and carrying trays. But I saw everything. I was there when the empire fell. I saw the last emperor, a boy named Romulus Augustulus, give up his throne. It was a day I will never forget. The year was 476 AD. The palace was quiet, but not peaceful. The air felt heavy, like a storm was coming. Rumors had been spreading for weeks. Odoacer, a Germanic leader, was marching toward us with his army. People whispered that he was unstoppable. Rome, they said, was finished. Romulus was only 16 years old. He was called Augustulus, which meant Little Augustus. It was a name meant to honor the first emperor of Rome, Augustus. But Romulus was not like Augustus. He was just a boy. A boy trying to hold on to a crumbling empire. I first saw him that morning, sitting in the great hall. He wore a golden robe, but it looked too big for him. His hands trembled as he held a scroll. The message had come from Odoacer. He demanded the emperor's throne. If Romulus refused, the consequences would be terrible. Romulus's advisor, a tall man named Flavius, stood beside him. "You must decide, Your Majesty," Flavius said. His voice was calm, but his eyes betrayed his fear. "If you resist, the city will burn." Romulus looked up at him. "What should I do?" he asked softly. His voice was shaky. "I don't want to lose my throne." Flavius knelt beside him. "Sometimes," he said, "a wise ruler must know when to step aside. You are young. You can survive this. But Rome may not." I watched from the shadows as they spoke. My heart ached for Romulus. He was just a child, forced to make a decision no boy should have to make. I wanted to comfort him, but I didn't dare. I was just a servant, What could I say to an emperor? Later that day, I saw him again. He was alone in the palace garden, staring at a fountain. The water sparkled in the sunlight, but he didn't seem to notice. I hesitated, then stepped closer. "Your Majesty," I said quietly. He turned to look at me. His face was pale, his eyes filled with worry. "Yes?" he said. "I'm sorry," I said. I want you to know that Rome will always remember you." His expression softened. "Do you think so?" he asked. "Will they remember a boy who couldn't save his empire?" I didn't know what to say. Instead, I nodded. "You are brave," I said, "no matter what happens." That evening, Odoacer's army reached the gates. From the palace windows I could see them, thousands of men armed with swords and shields. They looked fierce, ready for battle. The palace was in chaos. Servants ran through the halls, packing what they could. Some of the advisors begged Romulus to flee. "Go south," one of them said. "You'll be safe there." But Romulus shook his head. "This is my home," he said. "I won't run." As night fell, Odoacer entered the city. He didn't burn it, as we had feared. He came to the palace, his steps echoing through the marble halls. His soldiers stood guard, their faces cold and unreadable. Romulus waited in the throne room. He sat on the golden throne, his back straight, his chin held high. He looked older in that moment, no longer a boy, but a ruler facing his fate. I stood at the edge of the room, my heart pounding. The doors opened, and Odoacer stepped inside. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a fierce expression. His armor gleamed in the torchlight. For a moment, no one spoke. The room was silent, except for the crackling of the fire in the hearth. Finally, Odoacer broke the silence. "You are Romulus Augustulus?" he asked, his voice deep and commanding. "Yes," Romulus said. His voice was steady, but I could see his hands gripping the arms of the throne tightly. "You know why I'm here," Odoacer said. "Rome has fallen. The empire is finished. It is time for you to step aside." Romulus hesitated. For a moment, I thought he might refuse. Then he stood, slowly, and took off the golden crown. He held it out to Odoacer. "Take it," he said. "But promise me one thing." Odoacer raised an eyebrow. "What is that?" "Spare my people," Romulus said. "They have suffered enough." Odoacer nodded. "I promise," he said. He took the crown from Romulus's hands and placed it in a chest. The act was simple, but its meaning was enormous. Rome, the great empire that had ruled the world for centuries, was no more. After Odoacer left, the room was quiet again. Romulus sat down, not on the throne, but on a simple bench. He looked tired, as if the weight of the world had been lifted from his shoulders. I approached him carefully. "Your Majesty," I said, "are you all right?" He looked at me and gave a small, sad smile. "I'm not an emperor anymore," he said. "You don't have to call me that." To me, "You'll always be an emperor," I said softly. In the days that followed, Romulus was sent to live in a villa outside the city. It was a quiet place, far from the chaos of the palace. I heard that he lived peacefully there, spending his days reading and tending to the gardens. But I never saw him again. The palace became Odoacer's. Rome became part of his kingdom. The city changed, but its spirit remained. The streets still echoed with the memories of its glory. The people carried on as they always had. Now, as I look back on that day, I think of Romulus often. He was just a boy, caught in the tide of history. He didn't choose to be an emperor. He didn't choose to lose his throne. But he faced his fate with courage and dignity. Rome may have fallen, but the stories of its emperors, great and small, live on. And I, a simple servant, will always remember the boy who was its last. Chapter 10. The World Left Behind. Brother Marcus sat in his small room, the sound of his quill scratching against parchment. The candle on his desk flickered, casting shadows on the walls. Outside, the wind howled, carrying the scent of the forest beyond the monastery. But Marcus barely noticed. His mind was focused, his hand steady as he copied the words of an old Roman text. "This is important," he whispered to himself. "Rome may have fallen, but its wisdom must not be lost." The world had changed since the fall of Rome. The roads that had once connected cities across the empire were now broken. Grass grew where soldiers and merchants had once walked. Bandits roamed the countryside, making travel dangerous. The great cities of the empire had grown smaller. Buildings crumbled, abandoned by their owners. The grand baths and temples of Rome stood empty, their marble stones stolen for other uses. But for Marcus, the greatest loss was not the roads or the buildings. It was the knowledge. The libraries that once held the works of Roman scholars were disappearing. Books were burned, stolen, or left to rot. The stories, the science, the laws of Rome. Everything was at risk of being forgotten. Marcus was not always a monk. As a boy, he had lived in a small Roman town. His father had been a teacher, a man who loved books. Marcus remembered sitting by the fire, listening as his father read aloud. Stories of heroes like Aeneas and Caesar. Lessons about the stars, the earth, and the laws that governed the empire. But those days were gone. When Marcus was 12, raiders attacked his town. His father was killed. The books were burned. Marcus fled to a monastery, seeking safety. There he found peace and a purpose. The monastery was a quiet place. The monks worked the fields, baked bread, and prayed. But for Marcus, the most important room was the scriptorium. It was there that the monks copied books by hand, preserving the words of the past. When he first saw the rows of books and scrolls, Marcus's heart filled with hope. "We can save them," he thought. "We can save what is left of Rome." Now, years later, Marcus was one of the scribes. Every day he sat at his desk, copying text after text. His favorite was an old history of Rome. Its pages told the story of an empire that had ruled the world. It spoke of great leaders and great battles, of laws and inventions that had shaped civilization. As he wrote, Marcus felt a deep connection to the past. He imagined himself walking the streets of Rome, hearing the voices of its people. He imagined the Senate debating, the markets buzzing, the temples filled with worshippers. This is what we must remember, he thought. This is what we must protect. One cold evening, Brother Thomas entered the scriptorium. He was older than Marcus, his hands stained with ink from years of copying. He placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "You've been working late," Thomas said. "Take care, brother. We can't save everything." Marcus shook his head. "We must try," he said. "If we don't, who will? Rome may be gone, but its knowledge is the foundation of our world. Without it, what will we become?" Thomas sighed. "You're right," he said. "But be careful. The world outside these walls is dangerous. Not everyone values knowledge as we do." Marcus thought of the dangers often. The monastery was safe for now, hidden deep in the hills. But he knew of other monasteries that had been attacked. Raiders cared only for gold and food. Books meant nothing to them. One day, a messenger arrived at the monastery. He brought news of another raid, not far away. A monastery had been burned, its books destroyed. Marcus clenched his fists when he heard, "Why do they destroy what they don't understand?" he asked aloud. "Fear," Thomas said simply. "People fear what they don't know." That night, Marcus lay awake in his small room. He stared at the wooden ceiling, thinking of his father. He remembered his father's words. "Knowledge is the light of the world. Without it, we are blind." The next morning, Marcus went to the scriptorium early. He opened a new scroll and began to write. His hand moved quickly, but his mind was calm. Every word he copied felt like a small victory. A piece of Rome saved. Weeks passed, and the scriptorium grew colder as winter set in. But Marcus didn't stop. He copied works of philosophy, law, and poetry. He wrote about the stars, the seasons, and the art of building roads and aqueducts. One day, he found a text he had never seen before. It was old, its edges frayed. The title read, "The Lives of the Caesars." Marcus's eyes widened as he opened it. Inside were stories of Rome's emperors, good and bad, strong and weak. "This must not be lost," he said aloud. As he worked, other monks came to watch. "Why this text?" one asked. "Because it tells the truth," Marcus replied. "It shows us what made Rome great and what led to its fall. We can learn from it." The monks nodded. They understood. Rome was not perfect, but its history held lessons for the future. By spring, Marcus had copied many texts. His hands were sore, his back ached. But he felt a sense of pride. The books he had saved were stored in a small library, safe for now. One morning, he walked outside and looked at the hills surrounding the monastery. The world seemed so vast, so fragile. He thought of the roads that no longer carried travelers, the cities that no longer shone, the libraries that were empty. "Rome is gone," he said softly. but its spirit lives on. We are its guardians now. Years later, Marcus's work would reach others. Scholars in distant lands would read the books he copied. They would learn from the wisdom of Rome. They would rebuild what had been lost. And Marcus? He would remain at the monastery, his quill in hand, preserving the light of knowledge. For he believed, as his father had, that knowledge was the light of the world. And as long as that light burned, there was hope. Chapter 11. Legends of the Eternal City. In the grand city of Constantinople, the morning sun shone through the tall windows of a classroom. A dozen young students sat on wooden benches, their eyes fixed on their teacher, Master Leo. The Eastern Roman Empire still stood strong, but Master Leo often spoke of the old Rome, the one that had fallen. Today, he said, his voice clear and steady, we will talk about why Rome matters. Though its empire in the West has fallen, its spirit lives on. Its ideas are still with us. The students leaned forward, eager to listen. Master Leo always made history feel alive. Tell me, he began, walking slowly across the room, what do you think of when you hear the name Rome? One boy raised his hand. The Colosseum, he said, and the gladiators. A girl beside him spoke up. The roads. My father says Roman roads still run through the countryside. Master Leo nodded. Yes, the Colosseum, the roads, the aqueducts, these are great achievements. But Rome's greatest gift is something less visible. It is its ideas. He paused, letting the word hang in the air.